All right. Thanks, everyone, for being here. You took my moderator chair, I think. I would have loved to sit over there. No, that's great. So we're going to talk about the corporate in the digital ecosystem. And for me, this conversation should lead to being able to distinguish between the bull in the china shop, or the elephant in the Porzellanladen, as we say in German, or the unfair market advantage if the collaboration is done right. And for that conversation, as already introduced, I'm really happy to have a couple of the tech and startup veterans of the European tech industry here on stage with us today. And also Michael from RBI, who's also in charge of the digital strategy in the organization. So it's very interesting to learn more about that. And I think it's important also that along the journey in collaboration between startups and corporates, there's a learning with and a learning from. And that would be something I would love to focus on to get started. What do you think is the most valuable lesson that can be learned from the collaboration between corporates and startups? Who would like to go first?
Well, I think there was a funny incident today in the morning, actually. We had a fire alarm in our office building, and the fire alarm exactly went off a few minutes before I came to the office. The whole street was full with people. All the offices went down, everybody chatted, everybody had a good time. I walked up, all my team members walked up, and basically our office was full with people. Nobody even cared, because we basically figured out it's just a wrong alarm. And I think that, and everybody would have been super annoyed to leave the building. It's super annoyed. So
they're going through flames.
So all the other people had a fun time downstairs. We're standing in the sun having a cup of coffee, and our people were just happy in their offices. And I think that kind of exemplifies the big difference in culture, in motivation, and at the end of the day in drive. And of course, it's very difficult that's easy if you're 20, 30 people. It's super difficult if you're 1,000 or 5,000 or 100,000 people. But that's at the end of the day what I think everybody's looking for when they all look at this strange startup phenomenon. So that's my take.
So culture, you would say, is the best
culture,
thing?
Culture, ambition, self-motivation, fun at work, you know, like doing something that you really like and not something where you prefer to sit in the sun and have a coffee. It makes a big difference. And all these other meta topics, I mean, we all know that Moore's law, big digitalization trends, but that's only one part of the medal. The other part is having the entrepreneurial energy to actually do something about it. And that's where it's super hard to do this in a big corporate company.
Yeah, I would say there are two other things than the culture from our experience in the Silicon Valley, and that also, like, obviously some corporations in the Silicon Valley have already like a different cultures than corporations in Europe. So that needs to be considered, of course. But two things I've seen which make corporations in the Bay Area very successful, and experience derives from startups. First one is age doesn't matter in organizational structures and hierarchies. For very successful companies, think about like Apple, for example, right? It's an old economy company already. It's like 40 years old. It managed to kind of catch up and be innovative like over time. You might have like a 25-year-old leading a department of 250 guys with like an average age of like 38. And that is something that is very common in the US, that nobody cares about like age. And trying to find the best people, especially in the age range of like 20 to 35, where there's a lot of power. And I think that is something that is like very rare in corporations in Europe. That's an important aspect. And then there's another thing other than culture. It's like pure like skill set. If you think about like how startups build products and launch them, you have like performance marketing, you have A/B testing, you have like short innovation cycles, reducing the cost of failure, and like mechanisms to kind of create products. And that's pure skill set. That has not something to do with like culture. And if you compare that to corporates, before a product is like kind of launched and developed, you have like 1 year of like specification writing, and then 1 year of development, and so that pure hands-on skill set is also like important.
But so that's a lot of from what you can learn from the startups, but also what can startups learn from the corporate, and where can they learn together? And that's maybe a perfect question for you in this round.
Well, when we started at June of this year our accelerator program, and we had the first meetings of startups and our experts, and you must know we are boring bankers. But we are 50,000 of them. And then you have a meeting with a startup that are only 2. You have the full banking structure, all internal rules, and the complexity in thinking. And so what we see is, or what we can feel is, first of all, there is quite a lot of motivation. From the startup side, they want to know our expertise. They want to have, of course, our market access with more than 60 million customers. They have great ideas, but they have no customers. It's a problem after some time. And secondly, what we learn and what makes us so confident in the cooperation with startups is that we learn again thinking in a more simple way. We are conditioned by the regulator to do our business in a perfect manner. And now we learn again that the best solutions are the simple solutions.
Yeah, I think that's one of the key advantages to really interfere a lot with your existing organization with startup people. And what do you think about that, Ludwig?
Well, working exactly in the midst of corporates and startups, I believe that startup speed and execution is actually the thing that adds up to culture and method, tools as mindset in really building great things. And I totally agree, it's 80-20, yeah, and it's not a perfect product. So we never build perfect products. Why would we? Yeah. So this is what I believe makes startups and corporates really work together well, especially if you then add what you just said, your experience and especially your data. So, and customer experience. So, a corporate has learned more about any customer any startup can know of. That's totally clear, at least in the beginning. Yeah? Later on, I think this is why startups are so successful, because they collect data from the beginning. They totally use different tools and views on how to deliver their products then, and especially on shaping them, doing, I don't know, daily, weekly, or whatever rounds of new products. Yeah? And I think that's a big game changer, why they can keep up, why they can basically even accelerate in a way that they will overtake the corporate, as we can see in some industries yet.
Yeah, I totally want to emphasize. I think simplicity is key, and that's the big advantage. The sandbox that startups at the end of the day are. It's small experiments. And that's the advantage. It's not when we have to demystify this whole startup thing, right? It's not that these guys are not smarter, we are not smarter, by the way not, but we can live a simpler life. We don't have to think so much strategically. And that's where I think a lot of, especially European corporates, I mean, if there's one very simple basic advice in cooperation or in working with startups, try to be less strategic, try to think less about all the different implications, just buy the product or invest in the company or do something. And that's where Silicon Valley big corporates have a massive, massive advantage. And I think we completely underestimate this, how fast they move, how quick they do acqui-hires, how quick they are with actually buying a product from our portfolio. While in Europe, we sit in strategic meetings or in partner meetings or in cooperation meetings week after week, and startups walk away. And that's a very, very simple thing to do, I think. Very hard, obviously, but that is, for me, 80% of success.
And talking about personal experience and insights, because I guess you all have gained a lot. You probably looked into a lot of other corporate activities. You've all been involved and seen many of them. To share a little bit about the best practice and do's and don'ts in that field, and I think just to steer it in a direction, because we work with a lot of corporate on management trainings and executive education, and we just had the conversation on the preparation for the panel, talking about Bosch as a German company looking into acquiring a tech company, namely Nest, that you probably all know, was acquired by Google. And in the phase where they were doing their due diligence and looking into actually acquiring the company, they did it in a very German engineering way, looking into the product, testing everything, figuring out they could do this and that better and different. And the whole acquisition never happened, obviously because the price estimate was way too low compared to what Google offered just a few months later, because they never looked into the product. They only looked really into the data and the business opportunity behind. And I think this plays into the mindset and strategy point of view. And I'm really happy to learn more about the insights you bring to the table, because I think that's something very interesting to share.
Yeah, I can emphasize what you said. So if a corporate works together with like startups, you can do incubation, you can do acceleration, that's more on the early stage, but you also can do M&A and you can do like investments. And companies in the US are much more active in acquiring companies and investing money into a company. If you talk to a bigger corporation here, there is like a lot of excitement if there is one, so twice a year a deal of a couple of $100K and like, oh, we are doing startups, or like kind of that attitude. In the US, it's not a topic at all, because it's like an activity and a role that is structurally positioned in the organization. It's like if you wouldn't have a PR department, it's totally clear that every company has a PR department. And in the US, every company has an M&A department. And that department is doing investments and acquisitions. That being said, if you look at Google, for example, in 2017, just the ones that had been announced, they did more than like 30 acquisitions or majority investments or things like that. It's a daily thing. It's kind of like a week by week, we are investing, we're acquiring a company. And if you acquire or strategically invest into 30 companies, you get a lot of new young people, high energetic, entrepreneurial mindset. So they acquired, okay, there was big acquisitions like HTC as well, but they acquired like hundreds and hundreds of young people, knowing the young skill set, knowing the young culture, having 12, 14 hours days. And that like also changes the corporation as such, bringing on and incorporating and infiltrating the organization with like entrepreneurs.
Well, sorry, go ahead.
I want to underline this, because we see also our accelerator program as a kind of instrument for recruiting. You have so many great startups, so many perfect ideas, so great people. Unfortunately, they are not working for us, not now. And we see it as a program also to hire them, to make us as an employer more attractive. But what is crucial there is also the mixture in the cooperation with startups of integrating them into the bank or not. When you do a program or when you start such a program, it's not good to say finally we want to buy you or we want to have a stake in you. You must be very open-minded, very flexible. And it's also not good to run such programs isolated from, in our example, from the bank. You must find the perfect mixture. I know a big blue German bank spending quite a lot of money in their fintech activities, but it will fail because there is no bridge and no emotional bridge between the bank and the fintechs. But you must exactly bring people together. For example, my colleague here, Christian Gebert from corporate banking, he's a great guy, he's an expert, and he loves to work with the fintechs. And then he identifies with them, and then we can bring us together in a partnership.
Well, I can only second that, because I believe Google doing typically more than 50 transactions, as you already pointed out, a year, and most of them being also hiring back people even. So I think this is one point that should not be missed. In US, it's very typical that managers go out, found their own company, might be even funded by Google Ventures, and then might be bought off later on, getting 100 million or whatever out of the pocket, still then becoming another SVP or whatever in Google and or Facebook or wherever. So this is really typical, and I think that's part of the problem that we have in Europe, because this is something, the jealousy that is still mainly consistent amongst the top management in well, Western European countries, I'd say even. This is a big problem, because this kind of exchange between a startup board working there and then working back in the corporate is not happening. And the other thing that I also want to second is actually, if you want to do it, I think you have to do it outside of the general organization. Yeah? But then find exactly what you described, find the bridge or find the connection point where you can use your, well, typically massive resources that you have in your general organization, put them into play with the startup. Might it be customer base, might it be data, might it be customer access even only, yeah? Or might it be reselling the product. Yeah? But this is something I believe, if you do that right, you can really achieve great things. If that's not working, and I totally agree with you, seeing a lot of those corporate well, initiatives fail, let's say, especially being in Berlin. I don't know, 50 or 100 incubators, accelerators have been rising over the last years, and I totally believe that 99% of them will fail, for sure. Will be nice marketing spend, but that's it. And this is why I believe without having a real business angle and making money out of it even, there is no way of doing it.
Yeah, and I think I can absolutely agree on the point, because in many cases you speak to corporate representatives doing all sorts of startup activities. You speak to 5 different people, you get 5 different answers why they're actually doing it. And I think it very little adds to anything that actually changes. And in many cases, you see over the last couple of years, in corporate activities in the digital space, it's just to do something because everyone else is doing it, rather than having your own defined mission and strategy why we actually want to do this. So I think there is a lot of more don't stories around here. If you have any more to share, otherwise we'll move on to the next question.
I would think there's a very clear recipe for disaster. It's very clear, it's very simple. We've seen it over and over again. It's a marketing-driven approach to working with startups. It's a regional approach, trying to bring the best startups of Austria together. Who cares? It's about at least European, if not global competition. You need to get the very best people on your table, otherwise you're just doing marketing. And it's about commitment and multi-touch. I've seen so many corporates who try to like this, but they do put a little logo on top of one initiative or accelerator or a conference like this, and that's then their startup program. And the global companies that do this seriously have a multi-touch approach, and they do everything from acceleration to investment to investing in funds to big, broad M&A activities. And unless you're committed to this, you may as well don't do it at all and just hope you retire early enough.
Probably the key message here is that there is no happy pill that solves all of your problems at once. You need to have a set and tool set of activities, and I couldn't agree more. And your regional approach is the perfect lead to my next question I would have for you in the group, is really the importance of a local and a global network in these kind of activities, and also looking particular into more Eastern and more Western markets and dimensions. How do you see this as an important factor in your day-to-day operations?
I mean, you need all sides. Banking is a global business. And so it makes no sense if, for example, Raiffeisen Elevator Lab would be focusing only in Austria, on the Austrian market. This would be a rather boring exercise. It's very important to be open-minded, to see what happens in a global perspective. But then you can bring in the specifics of the region where you are active. And for example, the Central and Eastern European region, where we are one of the key players, the program showed us that this is a great region. It's a region full of innovative people. They haven't this startup culture, of course. They have lack of capital and so on. But this can be our contribution to a partnership. But building up a region, developing a region, such things like innovation management, accelerator program, incubator, this is one of the keys. And this couldn't be done by governments or politics. This is a task of the responsibility of companies.
That's probably adding to what I initially stated as the unfair market advantage, where obviously played that right, it can add a lot of value to the startup ecosystem, because in the end you always have to ask yourself, is it appealing enough to be able to attract the AAA entrepreneurs out there or not? And I think this is where you have to measure yourself with every activity that you're doing. But looking a little bit more on the local and global perspective, you're very active in the Silicon Valley, so
Yes.
what do you bring back here every time?
Actually, if you start a company in Austria, you have no or very few customers to serve in Austria. You have no and very few investors that want to invest in your company, and you have no or very few companies that want to acquire your company. So the whole thing you're doing basically like needs in all aspects international footprint. And if you look at what are like corporations or international investors looking at if you're a company from Austria, they just don't care that you're from Austria, right? So they want to invest into like a company that is like the global market leader, or they want to acquire the company that is a global market leader. And if it's in Austria, then it's a big disadvantage compared to as if it would be in the US. But if it's the global market leader, okay, right? But that shows how important it is to be global. And how important it is that you have the right connections and the right network to leverage. That's also why we at i5 Invest has such like a strong presence in the US, because it's for the topics we are like supporting, investing and growing, that's tech companies, the whole market is there. Customers are there, investors are there, employees are there. What is important for the local aspect of it, and that is very crucial, and that is where Austria is actually an advantage, or Germany might be an advantage, and like Slovakia might be an advantage, the HR, recruitment and talent market. So having a presence on a local base, the relevance of that is that you get the best people in the region, and you can afford to get them, and you can also get them, right? If we would be in the Silicon Valley, all our companies we are working with, like only few of them would get employees which otherwise would go to Google or to Palantir or like anyone else. So that is a big advantage. So you need like the local like brains and the global market, and that's the way to go.
I totally agree. So we did a little analysis of top 20 exits last year in the German market, and basically out of the 20, only 7 were acquired within Europe. Everything else went basically outside of Europe. And out of that, if you only look at Germany, there's actually even only 1. So clearly it is, as you say, it's international M&A that's happening, and the good companies are mainly even bought out of Europe. American investors typically, or even Asian investors. And that's something I'd like to add up, because it's a big topic for me. I also spend quite some time every year in the US, and I'm a big fan of Silicon Valley. No doubt San Francisco is great, and the valley itself too. But I believe the next Google will not be coming from US. And if you are really looking for great innovation at the moment in time, you should be definitively turning to Asia. So if you look into China, especially banking, by the way, what you can do now with WeChat or Alipay, we're 5 to 10 years behind, and I mean the US, but with that, not us, we're 10 years behind. Yeah, with WeChat, you have a platform already functionally fully, where you can do everything from paying your rent to ordering Uber, getting your food delivered, buying your stuff as of Amazon, and so on and so forth. So this is a fully integrated living platform. And there is nobody in the Western world that is anywhere challenging that. So that's a big example. But if you look into small companies and what's happening there, what a spirit there is, and how many people are founding, and how much capital especially there is that is going to be deployed, even US is nothing. Yeah? And compared to market, because you made the wonderful example of Austria or Germany, I mean US is 350 million, that's a lot. But China is 4 times that. Yeah, and then there adds India, and then there adds Southeast Asia and Japan, and so on. So this is the market. Yeah, and I believe it's very foolish to not look there and to basically orient yourselves rather there than even to the US.
I mean, the one thing we've seen also as a venture fund is that you get more and more acquirers from the region, from Asia. And I think if one thing that I would do as a European corporate, I would start to massively invest into acqui-hires. That's something that is nobody speaks about it. It's something that is kind of, I don't know, under the radar. But if you look how many of the companies for example, a fund like us with 60, 70, 80 companies in the portfolio get acquired through those, like, at the end of the day, you will have 30, 40% of companies that they will not fly. What's going to happen? Those are actually great people, excellent talent. And what happens? Google comes in, Facebook comes in, the Asians come in, pay, I don't know, 1 million per headcount, and take these people and integrate them and actually do great stuff with them. For investors, it's a great way out. And that's a machine. That's a machinery that is going on every week, but not in Europe. Almost no corporates in Europe who play that game. And it's a big loss of talent. That's actually real brain drain that's going on here. And it's so simple, and it's little money, comparatively.
I only want to underline this with Asia. We are always European-centric and always see our market, and we are proud if there is a small European champion with 20 million customers, and then you speak to the representative of Alipay, and he tells you, well, we have 600 million customers. And then you see, this is quite a lot. So also we Europeans should rather focus on the others, learn from them, export also our expertise, our skills, and import also their volumes that we can need in our business model. So this is, I only wanted to underline, because so we are always looking if something happens in Paris, in Frankfurt, or in London, or wherever. If EBA sits in Frankfurt or in Rome, it doesn't matter. Yeah. It happens on another place.
And the funny thing is even that in Asia, especially Germany, Austria, etc., Switzerland, actually have a very, very good reputation. Mm-hmm. So they even love buying from us, love having people from us, even more than Americans, actually. So I believe that's a huge chance. And to give another wonderful example that I personally very much liked on the acqui-hire side, probably everybody saw the new iPhone release, and apparently they do face recognition and have an augmented reality tool or virtual reality tool integrated. That's an acqui-hire they did in Munich. They bought a company out for more than $1 million per employee, and they never worked again, and the only thing was to buy the technology and have the heads come to US. That was part of the deal. And they get even much more millions, and that's what they did, and this is now the new iPhone, basically.
Last 2 months, 3 exits that way in our portfolio. China, US. Europe, not even on the map.
So I love numbers, so let's spend the last 4 minutes that we have on how you're going to measure success in these kind of activities, because we talked about it that people love to use it as a marketing tool or whatsoever, but really trying to change organization and business. I think in the collaboration between startups, the engagement in the startup industry, there's some key elements to measure that and to really prove the success of it. What do you see as the key relevant points there when you look at these kind of initiatives?
You want to start?
Well, when we started, for example, our accelerator program, and it was very important, and I think this is the first crucial step, that you have the commitment of the senior management. But finally, it must, and this is one of the main parameters, it must pay into your P&L, it must contribute to your business model. It may not be a marketing tool. We are a bank, we have to earn money, we are stock listed, we have to pay dividends to our shareholders. This is, I think, what all companies have as their main task. And so our parameters are poorly or mainly P&L and business driven. And there you must be also honest to startups you cooperate with, you work with, and say, finally, it must help our business. And of course, it must also help you in having success. Now we are, for example, and I told you before, we are working with 6 finalists of our accelerator program, and we are now defining, and this is the most intensive period we have in this program, concrete business cases where they are working with our experts, with our data, in a sandbox, that it really develops and improves our business model. Otherwise, we would fail. What is important and what is a parameter for me, internally speaking, is that we, in this way, or by this, we build up a failure culture. We haven't in such big companies, you have so many internal rules, audit, and so on and so on. But you must learn again to act as an entrepreneur, and an entrepreneur makes failures.
But at a cash flow negative stage of a startup, there's probably not much it will add to the P&L of your company, right? So how will you be able to distinguish between, will this really change my company and add new perspectives to it? Even though they lose money, I will be able to acquire them for a significant amount.
So that's why we are very open and flexible in this program. Finally, of course, we can hold a stake, and if we see that it's a great idea and that perhaps the resources of the startup will decline, of course, we can find other ways of cooperation. So I think you must be very flexible.
And I think timing is so, if you don't have a picture how the startup actually adds to your P&L, you shouldn't, then it's back to marketing and it totally will fail. But it will not happen this year, it probably will not happen next year. And that's where the good acquirers make the difference, because they have a conviction about the next 5 years. And then if you have this conviction about the next 5 years, you can add startups because it builds into this picture how your P&L will look in 5 years. And if you don't have this conviction, then you're back to looking at historic numbers, and then you're done with startups. That's it. There's nothing to do.
Yeah. I agree. So when we work with a corporate, first thing is that we define those KPIs, be it numbers of customers, revenue share, or be it EBIT contribution. So, and having defined that, then we only would fund and invest companies that could potentially fill that gap. And you're totally right. We do that with a horizon of 5 to 10 years probably, because that's the only realistic way to do it. Yeah.
All right, it's blinking overtime down here, so I think we are done. And it's highly appreciated that we end on time. I would see it that way. So to sum it quickly up, I think it needs a long-term perspective and a high commitment, and the openness and willingness to adopt new models. Would you agree? Excellent. Thank you.